Hello everyone, and welcome to my review of the core set. For those of you who may not have realized it, Blizzard revealed the entire core set in one big dump just earlier this week, and so we know both all the cards that will be in it as well as all the cards that are going to be out of it, and that makes reviewing this a little bit different than reviewing a typical set. Normally for a expansion set, I just go through and review every single card individually. That's not what I'm going to do for this. What I'm going to talk about is the cards that are leaving, because that's one of the most important things. The core set represents a huge change fundamentally in Hearthstone. Lots of cards that we've seen be part of Hearthstone since its inception are no longer going to be in Standard, and that is a huge deal. Some of them aren't necessarily a big deal, but some of them will fundamentally change the way that classes play and the strengths and weaknesses that they have. So we're going to go through each of the classes, talk about the cards that are removed, talk about the cards that are coming back, some of the cards that maybe from wild sets that are returning, the new cards, and of course the cards that are staying. So it's going to be a step-by-step process, but we're not going to be going through and going super in-depth on every single card because many of these are things that people know and have seen before. So let's just get to it, and we are going to start with Demon Hunter. And Demon Hunter has a lot of cards that are going away. You may say, but wait, Demon Hunter didn't really have a classic or basic set before. Many of these are from the Initiate set, which was a set of cards that was added for Demon Hunter to have that would kind of rotate out when this previous year rotated as well. So a lot of these cards, have only been around since obviously the beginning of the year because that is the only time that we've had Demon Hunter, right? It's only existed since Ashes Outland. So this is, obviously a pretty big group of cards. Blur, Shadowhoof Slayer, Consume Magic, Twin Slice, Mana Burn, Urzul Horror, Umberwing, Wrathscale Naga, Soul Cleave, Satyr Overseer, I don't know why I'm reading every single card, they're literally on the screen, Blade Dance, Altruist, Soul Split, Fellblade, Command the Illidari, Glavebound Adept, Wrathspike Brute, Flame Reaper, Inner Demon, Hulking Overfiend, and Nephrodamus. Anyway, among these, there's clearly some very, very, very important cards. I would say that the standouts here, to me, most notably are Twin Slice and Blade Dance, as well as Consume Magic. I think these are probably the biggest changes in terms of the pool that is available to Demon Hunter moving forward, because Twin Slice and Blade Dance have kind of been the pair that has given Demon Hunter the ability to deal with basically everything in any of its kind of mid-rangey control style decks. The ability to generate a ton of attack and then use that attack to clear off 3 random minions on your opponent's board makes it so that Demon Hunter decks don't really feel like they have much in the way of weaknesses to opposing minions. One of the sort of nature of Demon Hunter that we were told sort of originally, of the pool that they had was like, okay, well, they're not very good against big minions, right? They can do lots of incremental bits of damage, but big minions can cause them trouble because they have to attack into them. It's like, well, no, they don't, because they have Twin Slice, which, by the way, didn't quite get nerfed, because Twin Slice originally was the 0, if you happen to recall, 0 cost +1 got changed to 1 cost +2, which made it much, much more powerful, especially when paired with Blade Dance. Didn't make it more powerful in the sense of the tempo it provided, but became much more powerful as a burst damage tool as well as a clearing tool with Blade Dance. A lot of these cards didn't really see much play, so not really necessarily a huge impact on the metagame that, say, Urzul Horror is gone or that Blur is gone. Altruist is a card that has had a lot of controversy surrounding it, or at least did originally back when Demon Hunter was originally released. Altruist was frequently used to just blow up opposing boards, much in the same way as Blade Dance. So that is definitely a card that I think a lot of people are going to be happy to see go. One of these cards that I am a little bit sad to see go is Nephrodamus. I get that, they want to sort of shift maybe the nature of Demon Hunter from, the previous year to this year. Not that necessarily Nephrodamus saw a lot of play, but I think that's actually part of the reason that I'm kind of sad, is that it was one of my favorite cards in my Highlander Demon Hunter decks. It worked very, very well with like expendable performers. Obviously helped support any kind of token-based Demon Hunter strategy, which never really got off the ground compared to the other versions. So I'm a little bit sad to see that go, but I think that one of the most important things with the kind of philosophy of the core set is, in fact, change. And, that we don't just see the same things over and over. It's a little bit different, of course, for Demon Hunter, since Demon Hunter, has only had these cards for a year instead of, 7 years, like the rest of the classic and basic cards. So the feel is a bit different. Another card that I'm a little bit happy to see is actually Consume Magic. I felt like the ease with which Demon Hunter could deal with buffed minions again, or any kind of effect on a minion, taunt minions, because of how easily they had access to Consume Magic, especially after the introduction of Illidari Studies, I think was a pretty frustrating experience for a lot of people. So overall, a lot of cards going in Demon Hunter, but I think that the Twin Slice, Consume Magic, and Blade Dance are the most notable and most important of these. They'll have a very, very big impact on how Demon Hunter decks are constructed and play out. So let's talk a bit about the cards from Demon Hunter that will be in the set. So the cards are going to be broken up into the cards that are returning, generally cards that are coming back from other sets that have been in Wild, as well as cards that are staying that have been in the Basic and Classic set previously. It's a little bit weird for Demon Hunter, since cards that are returning are cards that are, say, from Ashes of Outland. They're just in the core set, so people get them for free. Essentially, that's the meaningful difference compared to other cards. But they're still just kind of available in either Ashes of Outland or in whatever set they originated in, as well as in the core set. So let's take a look. These are the cards that are returning either from the Initiate set or from Ashes of Outland that will be included in the core set. Pretty straightforward stuff. Obviously, essentially tools to showcase the Outcast mechanic, as well as the sort of attack focus and lifesteal effects from Demon Hunter. So these are all cards that are fairly solid and have seen play, so a decent baseline to build from. And then, of course, there are some other cards that were from the Basic and Classic set that are sticking around. We see obviously some changes here with the introduction of Spell Schools, something that is introduced new in the core set. We see that Chaos Strike is now a Fell card, and Feast of Souls, for instance, is a Shadow card. There are cards that interact with these, or at least theoretically are cards that will interact with these in the future. I don't believe there are actually any in the core set that do, but we have seen some cards, for instance, that are in the upcoming Forged in the Baron set that have effects that interact with Spell Schools. So those generally won't change the way that the cards play unless there is a card that specifically references them in some way. So again, pretty straightforward stuff. This is including a lot of the elements of a couple of different strategies. The Let's Go Face strategy with Chaos Strike, Warblades, giving you the ability to get some of that life back and boost your attack, as well as a couple of cards to bolster the token strategy that, as I mentioned before, never really got off the ground with Coordinated Strike and Feast of Souls, along with the sort of big demon strategy of Raging Fell Screamer, giving you some ability to take advantage of some of the new big demons that may be floating around, and let's take a look at those. Anyway, these are the new Demon Hunter cards that are being introduced, including a new legendary, Corvus Bloodthorn, 2-cost 2/2 charge lifesteal. After you play a card with Outcast, return this to your hand. There's obviously been a move away from charge being very prominent in Hearthstone, but this is a new charge card, so clearly not something they're moving away from entirely. But this is, the fact that it has both charge and lifesteal means that it's not just like a Smork Face kill you card. It can be used alongside, say, like I-Beam to get in some damage to your opponent, or kill a 1/1. Bounce it back to your hand, gain some more life. Can be used kind of more in a mid-range or defensive fashion rather than just as pure charge burn. Being able to kind of add 2 points of lifesteal charge to every Outcast card can be really interesting for an Outcast synergy deck, which is something that we've seen cards that theoretically support but haven't really ever see actually work out so far. So it'll be interesting to see if Corvus is enough to really turn that into a strategy, or if it just becomes a card that kind of sees a little bit of play, or any at all. Speaking of Outcast cards, the Ganar Glavesmith, 3-cost 3/2 Outcast, give your hero +3 attack this turn. I've always tended to find that I underestimate the value of a lot of these just gain attack cards in Demon Hunter. Relentless Assault, the +4 and immune card, I was I don't think this is that good. It's pretty expensive, And then, you know, because of the synergy with stuff like Blade Dance and Bladed Lady and such, that was actually a very powerful card in a lot of the mid-range Demon Hunter decks. I don't know if the rotation of Blade Dance will reduce the value of these things, relatively speaking, but the combination of the body plus stats, if you do outcast this, very powerful as a tempo tool in the early turns, and also potentially a powerful burst effect, just kind of tagged on to another minion, could be a decent card. It's a demon, so maybe there's some demon synergies going on. Most of the demon synergies in Demon Hunter, at least, seem to be focused on kind of the big stuff as opposed to smaller things like this, but worth keeping in mind. But speaking of big demons, Illidari Inquisitor is the new big baddie for the big Demon Hunter decks, and this is much more powerful in most contexts than most of the big demons we've seen before. 8 cost 8/8 rush is pretty decent in terms of okay, I can just play this and kill your stuff, especially if you get it at a discount, right, with a Fell Screamer. But most importantly, after hero attacks an enemy, this attacks it too. This is an enemy, right? This can be your opponent's face. You can play Inquisitor, attack your opponent's face, attack your opponent's taunt with the Inquisitor, and then attack your opponent's face, and it just hits them in the face. So that's a lot of damage. If you have some way to attack multiple times, if you gain Wind Fury or whatever, I don't know, you could just kill them in one turn pretty easily with this. So, or if you have 2 of them, you get them off of any kind of big demon thing. It could be very, very powerful. I thought Blur was leaving the format, but apparently it's not. Anyway, overall, I feel like these cards all have pretty powerful effects that they introduce to Demon Hunter, and give them a solid baseline to work from, whether for an outcast aggressive type strategy or a big demon strategy. I feel like the most impressive of these is the Inquisitor, and expect to see that ending games pretty frequently from these sort of demon-focused Demon Hunter decks. So I feel like Demon Hunter lost a lot more, in terms of the overall card pool. But obviously, there's just there's a ton of cards that were kind of being rotated from essentially acting as their previous year's expansion pool and weren't really intended to be replaced with just this set. So we will see Demon Hunter obviously get a bunch of new cards in the new set to replace those in some fashion. But the big changes to me are, again, the losses of Blade Dance and Twin Slice and Consume Magic more than anything else. Obviously, these new cards are pretty powerful, and I expect to see all of them to some degree see play and constructed. But those cards that are going to be leaving are going to leave a really big hole that we'll need to see if the next expansion can fill. Next up, we have Druid. Druid is a class that's had kind of the most changes to its classic set over time. We saw lots of cards that were nerfed back in the very first set of changes when the standard wild formats were announced. Stuff like Force of Nature, stuff like Ancient of Lore, Keeper of the Grove, etc. And let's take a look at what cards will be removed from Druid with the core set, and it's a lot. Some of these are pretty important things. I think that the things that stand out here in terms of the kind of omnipresent cards for Druid are Wrath and Swipe in particular. Wrath and Swipe have showed up in so many Druid decks over time. And Savage Roar, of course, has been a central component of pretty much every token-style strategy. So rather than focus on these, Druid decks are going to have to look elsewhere. Moonfire is going away as well. That's obviously a card that was used in both OTK-style Druid decks with Malygos, though Malygos itself is actually rotating as well as in Miracle-style decks with Gadsden Auctioneer. So, and Ancient of Lore and Keeper of the Grove, they got nerfed and now they're gone, right? I expect to see many of these cards that, by the way, that were previously nerfed and are now rotating out of the core set, potentially restored to their former glory when they actually go to, I believe they're calling it the Legacy set now, which will be included in Wild. Maybe Ancient of Lore can draw 2 cards again. Maybe Keeper of the Grove can be a 2/4. But I overall am pretty happy to see that these cards that kind of have been auto-includes, like Wrath and Swipe, are kind of moving out of the core set, that we're going to be seeing Druid need to lean on different things. Previously, there was sort of the idea that, okay, well, Druid is bad at dealing with a bunch of creatures, right? A bunch of minions in play. And that was almost never actually true because of Wrath Swipe, right? You could get like some amount of spell damage, swipe their board, and it would just kind of mean that, okay, well, you're weak to swarms. No, you're not. You just have swipe. And and Starfall too, in the kind of quest druid, like or decks that happen to have a bunch of spell damage could also be very powerful too. Obviously less commonly played, less potent in general than swipe, but definitely did see some play as well. So let's talk about the cards in Druid that are staying with this big group that are going away. So here we have kind of a sort of centerpiece of a lot of what's going on in Druid. Innervate, Wild Growth, obviously still have Ramp. Even though Savage Roar rather is going, we still have Power of the Wild, Soul of the Forest, Force of Nature. So they still have the themes that they have had. They have the Ramp theme, they have the Token theme, they have Choose One theme with Power of the Wild, Nourish, Ancient of War. And these are, by the way, there are some other cards that are staying, but that have been changed to some degree, which we will show in, well, now. So here we see 3 Druid cards that are sticking around, but are all getting buffs. We see that Mark of the Wild is going from +2/+2 Entente to +2/+3 Entente. Then Druid of the Claw is changing from either a 4/4 charge or 4/6 taunt to a 5/4 rush or 5/6 taunt. Not necessarily a strict buff in that case, because charge versus rush means that you can no longer just smork your opponent down like you could before. I actually played like a mid-range Druid deck back in the very original WoW, or I was going to say WoW, not Classic WoW, Classic Hearthstone, one of the first decks that I played. I actually had this sort of challenge to myself that I would get Legend with a different class each month, and Druid was the second one that I did. I was playing a mid-range Druid deck in the era of Miracle Rogue, and one of the major philosophies was cat is for fight, that you needed to kill them. You couldn't play defensively because you gave them too much time. And you can't do that anymore. You can't just charge your cat into them with Druid of the Claw anymore, but it is a stronger minion for removal effect. Cenarius, as you see, goes from 9 to 8 mana, still has the exact same effect, but there's a big difference between 9 and 8, right? Not only can you play it earlier, but you can play it alongside, say, Power of the Wild, the same turn you play your Cenarius. You can hero power that turn, you can use removal effects. So that's a pretty big buff to Cenarius as well. So I think that all these cards may go from being like not really things that you ever see in competitive decks to something that could theoretically see some competitive play. And there are a number of cards that are coming back from Wild that had been in previous sets. For Druid, we see Pounce, Enchanted Raven, Feral Rage, and Landscaping. So kind of shifting from the balanced Druid with Wrath and Swipe to the Feral Druid. We're going to be pouncing and Feral Raging. A little bit cheaper. We have this 0 cost. Pounce is an extremely powerful card. If you didn't play when Pounce was in Standard, it's actually quite powerful for a lot of decks to be able to get removal for 0 mana against small minions, or potentially use it in combination with stuff like Gadgetzan Auctioneer or whatever. Enchanted Raven, 2/2 Beast for 1. I remember when this first was printed in Karazhan, I believe. It was like, oh my god, a 2/2 for 1. And now we see 2/2 for 1s in kind of wherever. But it is a beast as well. And there are beast synergies that we have to see coming back from Wild. Menagerie Warden, who is coming back from Wild and is getting a buff. I suppose not a strict buff because it is a 4/4 instead of a 5/5, but reducing the cost from 6 to 5 makes it much, much, much easier for you to be able to actually effectively copy your beast with this. You can imagine coining out a Druid of the Claw, for instance, and then be able to follow that up with a Menagerie Warden on your Druid. Pretty big deal, right? It's a very, very powerful tool. If you also obviously copies buffs, maybe you see Mark of the Wild with +2/+3, seeing more play, and you can buff your beast and then copy with your Menagerie Warden. So there's definitely a lot of powerful synergies that seem to be being promoted for Druid. No longer, again, the balanced style, but more the feral beast token type style. They're going to have to look somewhere other than Savage Roar to find their finishers. They do have a new card being introduced as well for Druid, Nordrassil Druid. A 4-cost 3/5 with Battlecry. The next spell you cast this turn costs 3 less. So this is a pretty interesting card. You can play this in, say, a token deck, right? You can play this, essentially allow you to cast a Landscaping for free alongside it, or cast a buff spell alongside it, or cast Mark of the Wild alongside it. You can use this to play removal at the same turn that you're developing a 3/5. I don't view this as likely to be like a archetype defining card. It's just a fine tempo play, right? You have to want to play a 3-cost spell, which it could be something like Wild Growth, right? If you play this in a deck that has, like, say, Feral Rages and Wild Growths, you can use your say you need to use a removal spell on turn 3, like say you need to play a Feral Rage on turn 3 to kill your opponent's minion, then you get to play your Nordical Druid, give you a body to contest the board, and then Wild Growth on turn 4 to ramp you further. Obviously, you can also use it to play like higher cost things and get this into play as well. It's not just 3s. It's not just play a 3 for free. It's the next spell costs 3 more. So you could play this alongside, say, a 5-cost spell at 6 mana, etc., etc. So I don't think this is some sort of like archetype defining card, but I think this is potentially a solid role player to give Druid decks that have significant number of spells a way to not just fall behind on the board when they're trying to invest in those spells. So it'd be interesting to see what kind of play this does see. Being able to play this again with the buffed Mark of the Wild. You could play this and just Mark of the Wild it immediately. So you get to play, obviously it's a 2-card combo, but you get to play now a 5/8 taunt on turn 4. Pretty powerful for a Druid deck against a lot of aggressive decks. So certainly, something that I'm interested in exploring the possibilities. Obviously, depends a lot on what the spell pool is and what the metagame looks like. But this does feel like it could be a role player in a number of different decks. So I think the most exciting thing to me about Druid is the direction that it seems to be going with beasts. I think that for a long time, Druid has been very much a spell-focused class. We've typically seen these Wrath, Swipe, whatever decks, and seeing Druid have a different identity potentially this year, thanks to the core set, focusing on beasts with Menagerie Warden, with Enchanted Raven, etc. Really seems like an interesting direction that I'm excited to explore. Next up, we have Hunter. Hunter has a lot of changes coming in, including a lot of cards that are going away. These include a number of cards that kind of been staples for Hunter for a very long time. Most notably, I think, in the removed cards are Animal Companion, Unleash the Hounds, Kill Command, and Eaglehorn Bow. A lot of this stuff here hasn't really necessarily seen that much play, but those have been kind of emblematic of a lot of the play style of Hunter for a while. I'm a little surprised that some of this, Animal Companion being like, almost like a storyline card, right, for Rexxar. The always roll Huffer is such a meme in Hearthstone, and then Skill Command. So it's pretty surprising to see all of these cards going. A lot of these were kind of cards that didn't really see that much play anyway. And removing stuff like Multi-Shot or Gladiator's Longbow or long since nerfed Starving Buzzard from being around, I think is totally reasonable. Flare has also just kind of been a card that is very, very niche, but taking up a spot in the class cards of Hunter, kind of in the core set, classic set, whatever, for so long. Kind of reduces the amount of flexibility that they do have for a lot of other strategies, and kind of getting rid of some of the secrets that haven't really seen as much play. Snipe and Misdirection are the two secrets that kind of see the least play of the cards that have been in the basic and classic set for Hunter for a long time. So not really a surprise to see a lot of this stuff go, but it is a bit of a surprise to see, as I mentioned, Unleash, Animal Companion, Kill Command, and Bow. So this is a pretty big change coming to Hunter, but frankly, a lot of these cards haven't seen that much play in a while, right? You would see maybe like Bow, Kill Command, Companion in Highlander Hunter, but a lot of Hunter decks didn't even play all of these. Obviously, Kill Command for like Face Hunter, or like Unleash for like some amount, kinds of Face Hunter against other aggressive decks. So not super surprising that some of these, I feel like Unleash in particular, of these, has kind of been almost like power crept out of the format. Not really necessarily power crept, but like there used to be a lot of 2-1s, right? You used to have stuff like, Leper Gnomes and Abusive Sergeants of the World back when those were 2-1s. Floating around and being able to unleash the hounds and kill all of those against aggressive decks was really valuable. But Unleash has kind of dropped much more in power level and playability, thanks to more higher health minions becoming the norm in even aggressive decks. The Hunter cards that will be staying are Arcane Shot, Explosive Trap, Snake Trap, Freezing Trap, Scavenging Hyena, Deadly Shot, Highmane, and King Crush. So, as I mentioned, the traps that see more play, definitely sticking around. Arcane Shot is a kind of a weird one to me because this is, sort of a card that doesn't really see very much play and isn't really part of one of the core themes of Hunter, right? It's not a beast card, it's not a trap card. It doesn't really go with a lot of what Hunter is mostly known for. So that's one that's kind of surprising to me that this is sticking around. I do like Deadly Shot sticking around, giving Hunter kind of the ability to clear off big things situationally is nice, especially considering that we're seeing Hunter's Mark being removed as part of that class of cards in this set. And of course, Savannah Highmane, the true Hunter legendary, along with King Crush, the sometimes played Hunter legendary. Let's take a look now at the cards that are returning in Hunter from some wild sets, and these are some nice ones. Web Spinner, Headhunter's Hatchet, Quick Shot, Bear Shark, and Dire Frenzy. Some of these are fan favorites, right? Web Spinner is a card that we've even had Tavern Brawls that are entirely Web Spinners, giving Hunter a value-oriented one-drop instead of having just like the Timberwolf that was previously in the classic set, or was that even basic? I don't even know. Very, very, popular card when it was around in Nax. Nax is out, everyone. It's back. Headhunter's Hatchet as the weapon that is in the core set rather than Eaglehorn Bow. I think has a bit more flexibility than the secret reliant weapon. Obviously, it encourages more of a proactive beast strategy. And has a great pairing in the Web Spinner. Quick Shot taking the place of Kill Command. I actually kind of like this in the sense that it gives Hunter a more versatile removal effect. One of the big things about Kill Command was like it's so clunky if you're not just killing your opponent with it, right? If you're trying to kill an opposing minion and play more of a tempo game, Kill Command sucks, right? It's really, really weak. It basically, was primarily just to point at your opponent's face. Skill Command, kill you. Bear Shark is an interesting one. I was semi-jokingly called some number of years ago after the nerf to Fire War Axe. I called it the Year of the Bear Shark because I was like, all right, well now that Fire War Axe is gone, Bear Shark can reign supreme because Fire War Axe in every warrior deck at 2 cost was a something that basically made something like Bear Shark a 3 health 3-drop minion more or less unusable, right? Whereas now Bear Shark, without the tyranny of Fire War Axe, could theoretically be powerful, especially if you combine it with Houndmaster, who is gone. So you can't Bear Shark into Houndmaster anymore now that Bear Shark is here, nor can you Dire Frenzy it, which is sort of the buff replacement for Houndmaster. So it's a little bit weird to me, but it's a cool card. Dire Frenzy, a very cool card. This is a fan favorite among Hunter players. Was frequently used on Vicious Scalehide, the Rush Lifesteal minion, in order to give you not only immediate power that can keep you in a game, but also more of those copies in your deck. Very, very strong card, and gives Hunter kind of a different dynamic in terms of the way it can play out, not just being a, sort of smork you down, rush you down, giving you some more of a long game to play for. One crucial element of Dire Frenzy being here is the fact that Tundra Rhino was on that list of cards that we just looked at that was being removed. So Dire Frenzy was frequently used to buff small minions and then sort of keep those in hand and play them all at once with your Tundra Rhino and kill your opponent. So that's not something you can really do anymore. And also, spoiler alert, Stone Tusk Boar no longer has charge, it has rush. So that's a big change that makes your Dire Frenzy kind of like OTK style combos no longer work quite the same way. So it'll be interesting to see how players choose to use Dire Frenzy, but it does happen to have some synergy with some of the new cards, which we'll get to in a moment, because there are some cards that are returning but have been changed. And by some I mean one, Lock and Load. So I talked a little bit about how I thought it was a little bit weird that Arcane Shot was sticking around. Well, this seems to be the reason. The Spell Hunter strategy is getting one of the favorite cards that it was supported by back in the day, Lock and Load. Every time you play a spell this turn, get a random Hunter card in your hand, being reduced from 2 cost to 1 cost. So obviously, Lock and Load wants you to play a lot of spells and wants you to play a lot of cheap spells. So while Arcane Shot, I think, doesn't really fall into the sort of Hunter fantasy of synergistic stuff that we've mostly seen, it does fall into the Spell Hunter bucket as a cheap spell that you can pair with Lock and Load. So This is a card that even at 2 costs, people experimented with quite a bit. Never really saw that much success. And I think a big part of that was that at 2 cost, it was a little bit too clunky to try and do that much with. And with a 1 cost lock and load in the format, I think that we have a much more interesting sort of payoff card, a much more viable payoff card for spell hunters in the core set. So I'm curious to see what other kind of support that we end up seeing from the expansion sets this year in order to support this spell hunter direction. So lock and load is definitely a card to look out for because, as I said, even at 2, people tried to make it work and it almost felt like it was there. And at 1, if there is good support for it, and some of the changes I'm going to get to in a moment of some of the cards that are sticking around definitely help in that direction. So let's take a look at those, the cards that are staying and are changed. Here we have a big change coming to tracking. Not big in the sense that it dramatically influences the way that the card ought to be played, but a big change in the sense that I no longer ever have to explain to people why tracking is good. And I already see people in the chat and Twitch saying this is so much better. And the thing is, it's not. It is better, but it's not that much better. Because previously, the fact that you had to discard cards from your deck with tracking didn't really matter. Most of the time, you would use tracking, and then you could just imagine those cards that you ended up getting rid of were in the bottom of your deck, and you'd never draw them, right? This is now, instead of, okay, maybe I'm thinning some cards in my deck permanently, which, again, doesn't really matter most of the time unless you go through your entire deck. You just discover a card in your deck, and you don't get rid of anything at all. There are definitely Hunter decks that cared a lot about losing cards from tracking. Decks like using stuff like Katrina that would, specifically be digging through your deck for things. But overall, most of the time, tracking didn't really have that much of a drawback, except when you went to fatigue and actually ran out of cards. So my favorite part about this change is I don't have to convince people that tracking is good. Because so many times people will be like, hey, tracking's bad, I lose these cards, it cost me 2 cards to get this 1 card. It's not how it works at all. Most times, you end up not actually ever seeing the cards that, isn't actually a drawback. Let me start that over. Most of the time, not actually a drawback that you lost those cards because, well, your opponent doesn't know you lost those cards. Only you know you lost those cards. And you have the information that you won't draw those cards and your opponent does not. So this change to this just makes it simpler, right? It just makes the card more straightforward, and I think is great. But like, for instance, you can no longer use tracking to get bombs out of your deck, right? There are situations where this is a worse card, right? If you use tracking and there were bombs in the pool, you could say, all right, well, these bombs are gone, right? I'm going to choose this non-bomb card, and now I will never have to worry about drawing these bombs, right? If there's like negative cards in your deck, et cetera, et cetera. And you also don't necessarily get more information about the likelihood of drawing particular things because those cards are gone and you know about it. But overall, this does mean that if you are playing a deck that's built around combos, right? That's built around some kind of combo, you never risk hitting 2 of your combo pieces in your tracking and getting screwed by it, right? That was the big issue with tracking in some decks, is if you had very specific pieces of a combo or synergy or whatever that you needed to hold on to in order for them to be effective, that your tracking could mean that you would break that up and you would be in bad shape because of it. Most of the time it didn't matter, but now it doesn't matter ever. So I don't think this is that big of a buff to the card. I think it's a meaningful change to the card. Again, mostly because I don't have to convince people that tracking is good. Now they will actually just recognize that it's good because it doesn't seem to have a drawback, even though previously it didn't actually have much of one. And last but not least, we have the new card in Hunter, Selective Breeder. A 2-cost 1/1 battlecry, discover a copy of a beast in your deck. So this is kind of reminiscent of Stitch Tracker, which was a 3-cost 2/2 that discovered a copy of anything in your deck. This specifically working with beasts has synergy with Dire Frenzy, right? Like if you have a deck that doesn't have tons of beasts, you could potentially use Dire Frenzy and be very, very likely to Selective Breeder into the buffed copies that you hit with Dire Frenzy. This can be used just kind of as a minor value card to try and hit your curve. You can hit 3 or perhaps tutor specific things. The fact that it discovers specifically a beast. Maybe you have a deck that is based on some sort of combo with beasts. So you can, use this and be more likely to be able to piece things together. There's a lot of things this can do. I think this is just generally like a solid card. And between this and, and tracking, lots of ways to piece together these potential things. And obviously further solidifies sort of the beast theme, which is a core component of what Hunter cares about. So I think it's a really cool card. Obviously, not necessarily a all-star or whatever. Not going to be something that defines decks, but definitely a role player in perhaps mid-range beast decks, perhaps beast combo style decks, anything with Dire Frenzy, etc. So definitely a cool card, and I'm excited to see how it goes. As far as the overall state of Hunter with these changes, I think that we're going to see a bit less full-on Smork. Obviously, the loss of Kill Command, the loss of Bow, you have less incentive to play these like full aggressive decks, not having a 5 damage burn spell for 3. I'm personally going to be sad that we will not have the meme of Always Huffer any longer, at least in Standard, with Animal Companion, even though it was kind of outdated in terms of the overall power level of the card compared to most of what else was going on. But I'm excited to see what we see with the new synergies that are available with Lock and Load for Spell Hunter, as well as, of course, as I said before, tracking. I love that I will never have to tell someone that tracking is good again, even though it's not that much better than it was, if better at all. All right, next up, let's take a look at Mage. Mage has some of the biggest changes, I think, of all of the classes in the core set, with a lot of staple cards going bye-bye. So let's take a look. A lot of cards being rotated out here. I think most notable, well, there's a lot of notable things, right? Arcane Missiles definitely saw play in a lot of spell damage burst combo decks, especially alongside Sorcerer's Apprentice, because it is a cheap spell. Sorcerer's Apprentice has been sort of a fundamental piece of a lot of combos for Mage for a very, very long time, whether with Mana Cyclone type stuff or just cheap spells with Archmage Antonidas, who, by the way, also going away. I really like both of these cards leaving. I think that these cards have had their time in the sun to be the sort of core components of a lot of different Mage decks over time, but having so many Mage decks built around the exact same cards, and not even the exact same cards, like obviously like Fireball. Fireball's still there. Fireball, being a card that's included in tons of Mage decks, is not like a strategy-defining thing, right? Sorcerer's Apprentice being included in tons of Mage decks is, because it's like, okay, my deck is about casting tons of spells for cheap, specifically with Sorcerer's Apprentice, right? Not like, okay, my deck has a spell that damages you, right? Like, it's a very different kind of thing. Same thing with Archmage Antonidas, right? Like, having the finisher for Mage decks for a very long time obviously hasn't necessarily been for a bit because of other stuff like Mana Giant or whatever, but always having the possibility of, well, I'm looking for a way to beat warrior decks that gain a bunch of armor. Well, okay, there's Archmage Antonidas. You just make a bunch of spells by combining cheap spells with Sorcerer's Apprentice and Antonidas, and boom, you have a million fireballs. The cards that I'm probably the happiest are gone of this entire section are Frost Nova and Blizzard. Kind of ironic that I used "Are you tired of Blizzard?" in my core set discussion video initially, which was not intended to dig against the company Blizzard, but more at the AoE freeze effects of Frost Nova and Blizzard, having been part of the core set, or the classic set for so long, meant that like so many games against control Mage decks were just freeze your board, freeze your board, freeze your board, freeze your board. And that being something which is no longer just always going to happen because these cards are just always in Standard is something that I'm very happy about. I think that Mage needing to look elsewhere than just the exact same cards they've always used for board control is something that will inject more fun, more variety of gameplay into Hearthstone. So I think that they obviously are very powerful cards. They've had their role, but I'm happy to see them gone. Polymorph, another card that's a really big deal that's leaving. Mage has always had one of the best ways to deal with basically anything in the entire game, and being able to, ignore death rattle effects, ignore buffs, whatever, because you have freezes and polymorph available, kind of invalidated a lot of things against Mage, and having that no longer just be omnipresent in their arsenal is something that I'm happy to see, even though it's a little bit scary to imagine a world where, like, you want to play a control Mage deck and don't have access to polymorph. So it does open up the possibility. We'll see other stuff available for Mage for that, like, big minion control. And Pyroblast is something that, it's not. It hasn't really been a staple of a lot of decks, but it has always been kind of a thing that you see discovered by something or, whatever, and ending games in that way. The number of games that I've been like, oh well, I hope my opponent didn't discover a Pyroblast, and then they like Pyroblast me, and I was like, I'm glad that's not necessarily always going to be the case. One sort of staple card that isn't really as kind of defining, I think, in terms of gameplay that's going away is Frostbolt, though. Frostbolt's a card that I actually kind of expected to stick around alongside Fireball, but it looks like that Blizzard wants to kind of move away from the sort of freeze effects that have kind of always been in the classic set. There are some that are still there, which we'll get to in a moment, but it is a little bit surprising to me to see Frostbolt of all cards gone, because that has been one of the most played cards in all of Mage forever, which is an argument for it to be gone, but it's also not like a defining card in the same way that something like Frostbolt, or rather Frost Nova or Blizzard are, because it isn't just like, define the game in quite the same way of just like affecting all your stuff and, just causing games to kind of go on interminably, right? You could, like, I love having Frostbolt, especially against, like, say, Demon Hunter, right? Where there's not that many ways to interact with their ability to attack you in the face, and, well, I can freeze your face with Frostbolt was kind of a saving grace of a controlling Mage deck in that kind of matchup. So it'll be interesting to see what it looks like with Frostbolt gone. But let's take a look at what will be staying. Well, here are the cards that are staying for Mage, and they apparently have such an impression that they've completely blocked out the entirety of the Barons behind them. We have the three kind of most played secrets. We saw that Spellbender was leaving, as well as some of the other, most of their sort of secret synergy type cards. But we still have Counterspell, Ice Barrier, Mirror Entity, this kind of core three secrets, along with Arcane Intellect, Water Elemental, and Fireball. So not that many cards that are sticking around unchanged in Mage, but you still have obviously the some amount of freezing with Water Elemental, the card draw, and then a little bit of the burn with Fireball. But there are a bunch of cards that are coming, that are returning, or rather are staying, that have been changed in Mage, and largely they have been buffed. So let's take a look. As we see, there is still freezing going on with Cone of Cold, and it's in fact superior freezing, going from 4 cost to 3 cost. And I like this as like an AoE freeze type effect, much more than I like the Frost Novas and Blizzards of the world, right? Because, with Frost Nova and Blizzard, it's like, it doesn't matter what you do, it doesn't matter where you place your minions or how many minions you have in play, they are all frozen, right? And Cone of Cold means, okay, well, if you overload the board with enough stuff, or you position your big things well, that being the freeze effect they have means that there's counterplay to it, right? With Frost Nova and Blizzard, it's like either you have like, silence my minions can't be frozen, or they're just stuck. You skip your turn. Whereas Cone of Cold, there's the positioning possibilities, or just overloading the board, and you can still actually get some damage in, and not just be like stuck, frozen forever. And then the Flame Strike buff, a number of people have said, I can't believe they're buffing Flame Strike. Flame Strike's good. Flame Strike hasn't been really good for a while. You look at a lot of like Highlander Mage decks for the past several years, many of them have cut Flame Strike entirely because it just wasn't good enough at that stage of the game to really get the job done. I like the buff of Flame Strike from 4 to 5 damage, so especially with Blizzard gone, you need more ability to actually clear off the board rather than just kind of chip away over turns with Blizzards and then Flame Strike. So having the additional damage on that gives you more of like okay, well, I can play around like trying to get my minions bigger than Flame Strike, rather than like, okay, I have to hope that they don't all get frozen and then Flame Strike and whatever. So more power of the individual card, but less overall AoE in general. So let's take a look at some of the cards that are coming back for Mage, and these are some favorites, right? Babbling Book is beginning to be my favorite card. He's so, I forget the meme, but obviously, a very popular card, one that has the Babbling Book meme associated with the world champion. Also, giving Mage the ability to generate additional spells, as well as to generate spells starting on turn 1, the ability to actually play it out. I remember when Babbling Book first came out, right? And I was like, this card I think is really, really, really good, because it was actually not really received very well by the community. And I was saying that I think that especially for controlling Mage decks, being able to actually play something out on turn 1 that can give you the ability to attack your opponent's things, and especially work with your ping to kill stuff, was a very big deal. And obviously the card is very good, and giving you the ability to have access to wide range of spell stuff. Not being able to generate tons of AoE freeze effects from Babbling Book anymore is a big deal. You can't Babbling Book for Polymorph. You can't actually Babbling Book when it comes back. So it is weird that we're seeing Babbling Book, but you can't actually get the Babbling Book. So it's kind of crazy. Shooting Star, another sort of small damage positional based AoE. We're seeing a lot of spell damage stuff. I'm curious we'll see like, you know, big arcane spell damage buffs, because that obviously would work very well with Shooting Star. Very, very powerful card with spell damage because you can, you know, blow up your opponent's stuff very, very cheaply. Also important, Arcane Explosion is gone. So there's no just mass AoE. There's just the sort of targeted AoE cheaply for that. And a huge deal is the fact that Arcanologist is returning. Arcanologist was one of the strongest mage cards ever. Very, very powerful. 2-cost, 2/3. Battlecry Draw a Secret. Obviously, there's no ice block like there was when Arcanologist was in Standard, but having access to, you know, copies of Ice Barrier, whatever other Secrets might be out there currently, stuff like Flame Ward, you know, a lot of things that you can use to be able to develop your board, contest the board, as well as get card advantage and find specific key cards in your deck. So very, very good. Fallen Hero, I'm less impressed by. You know, but we do see, if you're going to take a quick look at the cards that are coming back, but are getting changed in some capacity, there is clearly some element of a hero power theme going with Mage, because there is Fallen Hero as well as Caldera Drake in the core set, and Caldera Drake is getting a buff, going from 6/6 to a 6/7, and if Boulderfist Ogre has taught us anything, that is good stats for the cost. Being able to multi-hero power alongside the Fallen Hero is quite powerful. Snap Freeze going from a 2-cost to a 1-cost card, and Ethereal Conjurer coming back with a 4 health is, you know, that's a card that was like always kind of a top-end inclusion in a lot of tempo-style mage decks or Highlander-type mage decks, and that getting a little bit of a buff, you know, to sort of compete with stuff in the modern world, I think is totally reasonable. And again, the fact that these kind of like generate random spell cards or discover spell cards can no longer hit stuff like Blizzard, I think makes me happier about their existence, because you don't just have the interminable games where there's just freeze after freeze after freeze after freeze generated. You have rather stuff like Cone of Cold and Snap Freeze that are more targeted and not just invalidating your opponent's entire turn constantly. So I'm excited to see what we see that can like sort of synergize with some of these things. I was obviously a huge fan in the past of Duplicate. One of the things that made Ethereal Conjurer powerful back in the day was being able to like duplicate it and keep getting more and more spells off of it as you got more and more minions, forcing your opponent to deal with all of that. No Duplicate returning in the core set, but it's sort of setting the precedent for cards coming back. Maybe we'll see some of them in the expansions, who knows, but definitely worth keeping in mind these cards when we do look at what's coming in Forged in the Barrens. But there is one new card, PogChamp, coming for Mage, and it's a very interesting one. Aegwynn the Guardian. 5-cost, 5/5 with spell damage +2, so as I was saying, things with big spell damage for stuff like Shooting Star can be a really big deal. This is a 5-cost spell damage +2 that has Death Rattle. The next minion you draw inherits these powers. So the Guardian is sort of a title and role in the Warcraft universe that went, you know, was passed down, until Medivh, who was the last Guardian, and sort of inherited these magical powers. Spell damage +2. You could get like spell damage +2 on whatever. Whenever this dies, goes to another thing. Definitely a cool effect. There's not that much silence around. You know, obviously there's still Owl, but Spellbreaker was long since Hall of Famed. You know, if your opponent kills this, or if you want to play a spell damage deck, right? Your opponent kills this, and just like, okay, well, my next thing's a spell damage card. My next thing's a spell damage card. Whether it's your Arcanologist or one thing that I actually saw someone suggest is you play this with clowns. And you end up drawing like Carnival Clowns that all have +2 spell damage. And then you're like, all right, but there's no Arcane Missiles to play with it to just blow your opponent up all at once. Anyway, I think it's a super cool card. I don't know if there's necessarily explicit ways that you abuse this, but I'm sure there will be. And if you are playing a deck that really cares about spell damage, and there are a lot of cards like, again, Cone of Cold, that is a cheaper spell now that can more easily be combined with things that have spell damage to do AoE damage to stuff. Alongside, again, Shooting Star, etc., etc. So I think this is definitely a very cool card, and exploring sort of the spell damage synergies in Mage along with this, and being able to ensure you have spell damage when you need it, because, well, all your minions have spell damage after this dies until it gets silenced, and I think that's really cool. So overall, I really like the different direction of Mage. You know, I think that obviously there's a lot of cards that have been core to what people have felt was the Mage experience, stuff like the Frost Novas and Blizzards and Polymorphs and Sorcerer's Apprentices of the world. But I think it's great that we're seeing a lot of sort of new stuff come and sort of supplant what we have seen and kind of had to deal with if you're playing against Mage for so long. You know, in particular, I have long argued that the AoE of freeze effects were kind of a negative experience. You know, back since the freeze Mage days, where you would just freeze the board, 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 kill you. That being part of what was always around, always felt pretty bad from the experience of playing against Mage, and I'm really excited to see the different direction the class takes with this core set.